make those pressures that you might feel or your anxieties and concerns just a little bit more in perspective. But there's a huge element of client relationships which is based on people, and people want to know people. They want to be able to get along with the person they're working with. The stuff that for me I think is really important is finding your people who are welcoming and friendly and collaborative. And it was a sort of unexpected boon to realise just how kind the world can be. There are so many ways to network. It's another string to the bow that's out there.
On today's Legally Speaking podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Mack. Emma Mack is a solicitor advocate and until recently was a senior associate at Clifford Chance. She has nearly a decade of experience in big law, corporate and commercial disputes, litigation, arbitration, mediation, expert determination and settlement negotiations. Emma also specialised in obtaining interim relief and enforcing judgments inside and outside of the English jurisdiction. Remarkably, she has never lost a case. Emma has increasingly been active on LinkedIn since 2024, encouraging those in the legal profession to share their journeys and words of wisdom. She was also made a finalist in the Solicitor of the Year 2024 Awards, run by the 100 Years Project, which was founded by Dana Denise Smith, OBE, which seeks to promote female participation in the legal industry. So, a very big welcome to the show, Emma.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I'm conscious I'm sitting alongside some very impressive previous guests, so thank you for giving me a seat at the table.
Oh, it's our absolute pleasure. And before we dive into all the amazing work you have done for the legal industry and no doubt will continue to do so, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality of the law if you've seen it?
Okay, so this is where I have to admit that I haven't seen it, but I'm going to turn the question around and ask you, what do you think the answer is?
That's a very good way to lawyer on me. And I've sort of said in previous shows, I sort of sit between a sort of 5 and 6. I think there are some elements of it that could potentially be realistic, but a large part of it is showbiz. That's kind of where I sit. So with that, we can agree.
Reality.
Yeah, I think some of the nice suits, some of the offices. I think the actual lawyering part is very off the mark. So I think a lot of the lawyers that have been on and given it a rating of sort of 1 or 0. Yeah. I think there's some validness on that, where Harvey can sort of be a corporate lawyer 1 minute, then he's in court, then he's a litigator, then he's doing these closing deals in seconds. I think all of that is probably a little bit far stretched. But I love the show. I love the entertaining factor, and I love how you managed to make me give an answer to that question. You're one of the first guests to do that. So well done. Very good lawyering skills. So let's get back to you, though. So to begin with, would you mind telling our listeners a bit about your background and career journey?
Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting to start with my parents and grandparents and the role education played, but I'm conscious that's going quite far back. So obviously do just cut in if you feel like I'm going off topic at some point. So I am from Birmingham, born and raised, which is where my parents moved in the 80s for work and had me. And my dad's side of the family is from the East End of London. They had a corner shop in Bethnal Green. And my mum's side of the family is from Yorkshire. My dad went to uni, but I don't think my mum did. I think she went to art college and then taught textiles at a local polytechnic. And my grandma, who I've written about fairly extensively on LinkedIn, was born in 1914 and really saw that first cusp of women staying in education for longer and getting careers and all of the big questions around whether you can stay in work once you're married and or have children. But that's kind of, in a nutshell, education is really transformative in terms of my family's history and also really informed my childhood. And so that kind of takes me into school, which is, I wasn't necessarily that stellar at school initially. I have written a little bit about having dyslexia in my earlier years and being taken out of the classroom for special classes. But then sort of as time went on, my grades were kind of improving. And by the time I got to the end of secondary school, I was looking at studying Italian language and literature at Oxford University. Which was a tough degree, but I enjoyed it a lot and came out with a double first and went on to do an Italian master's. And I think that that's a kind of an interesting point in which to break, because that was 2010, 2011, which is post-financial crisis. And I was seeing a lot of my friends who had done 3-year degrees be it in the sort of job market with a solid degree in a STEM subject, and there was this huge bottleneck because you had kind of a few years of graduates coming out of uni and not getting into the workplace. So I was watching all of that going, dear Lord. And then there was also the fact that the government of the day was slashing funding in further education. So the arts and humanities were taking the bigger hit of that slashed funding, and a PhD wasn't necessarily looking like the most bright future that one could go through. So I think it was really at that point that I started investigating careers fairs, and obviously it's quite a well-trodden path from humanities into law. No one in my family is a lawyer though, so it's not as if it kind of came from home or anything like that. And I did all of the traditional stuff that people do when they're thinking about a law conversion. So lots of applications for vacation schemes, lots and lots of rejections. I got rejected from every single law firm I applied to but one, and that was Clifford Chance. And I attended a winter workshop that they put on for postgrads from a non-law background in winter of, I want to say, 2011 maybe, something along those lines. And that was really invaluable. That for me was the turning point, and I think it is for so many people, about then being able to speak quite cogently at interview about your understanding of what a training contract involves, and therefore securing a training contract job offer. So, just fast forwarding over the usual stuff, went back to uni to do a law conversion and the LPC in order to specialise into being a solicitor. And I did my 2-year training contract at CC, choosing to qualify into litigation and dispute resolution, where I went on to practice for 9 years. And as you know, I left the firm recently. At the moment, I'm at a bit of a careers crossroads thinking about next steps, but that's sort of my career journey to date.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I'm a big advocate, actually, for, starting at the beginning. I talk a lot about my late grandfather who ran his own law firm, and that was an inspiration for why I wanted to kind of continue doing work in this space and leave a legacy in legal. And I love that you talk about your grandma and you write about her and that sort of inspiration, and then some of those family values. And a fellow Midlandser, I'm a Leicester man, so Birmingham, Leicester, not a million miles away. But you had a fantastic, time, and you did some great work at CC. You mentioned there, obviously, specialising across commercial disputes, litigation, arbitration, mediation, a whole host of different pieces of work. Just tell us a bit about that, as much as you would like to, in terms of some of those areas, and any tips maybe for people thinking about getting experience in those areas that you think would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'd say my client base was principally corporates or individuals within corporate organisations. And the way I think of corporates in a very kind of broad sense is a non-financial institution. So I sort of divide the world up into that sort of lens.
Yeah.
And the reason why they would come to a firm like Clifford Chance is because of high risk or bet the business disputes that they need advice or representation on.
Yeah.
And as you say, those disputes could be in the courts, they could be in arbitration, they could be in expert determination. And the forum really depends on the relevant contract that underpins the legal relationship between the parties. So the first thing that we would do would look at the governing law and the jurisdiction clause to see, where are we talking about here? And then we'd really be acting for them with a view to trying to resolve the dispute, whether that's through settlement, kind of commercial outcome, or whether it's sort of going to the very end of a dispute and getting the outcome that you are hoping for, really. So the kinds of disputes that we're talking about, and I'm going to talk about these in a slightly sort of layman's terms, because that's partly how I think about them, and I think it makes it more digestible, is one aspect of that is what I call business divorce. So you have business partners who fall out, and they no longer want to work together, they no longer want to run or own the business together, but they've not been able to amicably work out how they're going to do that. And so they bring in lawyers to try and work out, how is this all going to get carved up, I guess a bit like with a divorce. And so that's some of the work that I would do, would be for, say, one owner of a joint venture. And one of my cases on that was a Blackpool Football Club case where there were two owners who were looking to separate, and we were seeking a buyout order, essentially, from the court for a certain sum of money. Another kind of case that I came up against a few times were completion account disputes, and that's a kind of growing area at the moment, where buyers and sellers wrangle over the price they've paid for an acquisition of a target company or that they're due to pay.
Yeah.
So you'd be looking at the completion account disputes in the SPA, the SPA being the share purchase agreement, that kind of governs the value, how it gets quantified, and what kinds of things are legitimate to raise for triggering that dispute. And I also do quite a lot of aviation disputes where it's about breach of contract around non-payment of rent for the aircraft. I could keep going. I don't know how much more it's helpful to hear about those things, but I think
it's super helpful, and I love it. I think it's the breadth as well of interesting work. And obviously, I'm based up in the Wild Coast now, so when you're talking about Blackpool and it clubs, that's not a million miles away from me. And I think that's what's exciting, isn't it? In terms of maybe going to the larger firms, that kind of exciting variation, interesting cases, high quality work that you clearly had access to and made a huge part. And I guess that lends nicely into you rose very well. You did exceptionally well at CC. So let's talk about life as a sort of senior associate. Would you mind telling us what a typical day would look like for you at CC as an SA, and perhaps how that differs from being an associate?
Right. So I think the thing that underpins all of the roles is a huge amount of triage and a lot of emails.
Yeah.
And then I think you're constantly moving between monitoring your inbox and the kinds of things that are coming in and doing deeper dives, so reading and analysing contracts, or joining a substantive call with a client or a barrister to discuss developments on the case, things that have changed factually, things that have changed perhaps in the case law, and really kind of honing strategy. Because cases often last for kind of 2 or 3 years. I would say that's the average for the lifetime of a case that's going to go to full trial. It can be longer than that. And so you can imagine that there is an ever-evolving picture. And often parties are still in negotiation, right? So they're still in touch and they're still, liaising with each other. So it's constantly changing. And you're also drafting pleadings. So there's this whole kind of process behind a court process around, you start off with pleadings and then you have evidence, whether that's witness evidence or expert evidence. And you have disclosure processes where each party has to send across to the other information that's relevant to the case. And then you sort of have skeleton arguments, which is the pure, I guess, nutshell of what each side's case is and the trial. That is sort of generally the sort of 4 or 5 step process that takes place over those 2 to 3 years. And so you have all of the review of those documents, the correspondence, and you're emailing clients with those updates or with those documents for their sign off, for their comment. And all of the things that go into that. So you're constantly checking in with the court on the state of applications, or you're settling the papers that the judge and the barrister will be relying on, and you attend court. So I'd say a lot of it is advisory and drafting, it's strategy, and I guess kind of how best to constantly place yourself in a sort of changing factual scene. In terms of the difference between senior associate and junior associate, it can look quite different, but it doesn't necessarily have to, and it's very specific to each person. So I know plenty of senior associates who haven't had a lot of exposure to court because that's just the way the cookie crumbled on their cases.
Yeah.
I've had loads of experience, which I feel very lucky to have had, because court is electric, but that is kind of sheer luck in a way. I think perhaps junior associates tend to do more of the first cut of materials. So you might be doing that as a senior associate, particularly where it's more complex. You might be doing the first cut, but a lot of it might be more review and then tweaking, improving, spotting gaps or ambiguities, how to make it as strong as possible, any kind of written document that you're putting forward. I think those are probably the main points I'd want to hit on what a day in the life looks like.
Today's episode is brought to you by Clio, host of the first ever Clio UK Virtual Growth Summit, running from 1 till 4:45 p.m. on March the 19th. Clio have an amazing lineup of expert speakers covering a range of topics to help you grow your law firm in 2025, like strategies to grow your personal brand, the power of change management, marketing, website and SEO mastery, tips on AI and the future of legal tech. Best of all, the entire event is free to attend. Plus, all the sessions will be live on the day, so you'll have a chance to ask questions, connect with fellow legal professionals, and share learnings. Secure your spot today by simply visiting clio.com/growth. Clio looks forward to seeing you at the UK Virtual Growth Summit on March the 19th. Now back to the show. You gave a really good example there of kind of the process almost end to end. And like you say, in terms of how it differentiates or may not differentiate. So thanks for that. One thing you did say, lots of emails, right? And so we're in this technological revolution. You know, I believe maybe email might be dead one day, or in some respects may even be more so in 2025. So I'm kind of a little bit verbose about that. But let's talk about technological advancements. With technology absolutely affecting the legal industry. And, you know, we're proudly sponsored by Clio, the world's largest legal tech organization. Last year they did a huge raise of 900 million and doing some really exciting work in this space, but particularly in AI. How do you think innovations like AI might impact the future of commercial litigation and dispute resolution? I'm quite keen specific on that because a lot of people are focused on transactional and saying how transactional law and AI is a lot easier to implement. So I'd love to get your take on it from a more litigious, contentious point of view.
Definitely. So it's already being adopted and has been adopted.
Yeah.
And I can only see it being more exponentially important as time goes on. I think one of the first of three key things is really its ability to streamline and automate some aspects of litigation that are incredibly time consuming and also costly. So document review and disclosure is a big one. And as you said, with the exponential explosion of email in the working world, document reviews probably back in the day used to look like 1,000 documents that you'd look at. Now you're looking at 1 to 10 million. Trying to get through that in terms of man hours is intense, and you need big teams and a lot of people. So I can see a world in which AI could really transform that process. I think secondly, it can help things like predicting outcomes. So the English legal system is based on precedent. And one of the things that I think distinguishes Magic Circle law firms from others is the ability to understand the universe in which you are acting and working, the previous decisions that have come about, and therefore predict going forward the likely outcome of a case that you've been presented with, so that you can accurately advise your client, is this the case to fight? Is this a case that you need to try and settle? And really to kind of hone what your advice is around the merits of a case. And I can see AI just becoming so good at being able to take all of that world of information and synthesize it to make more accurate predictions, and perhaps also then inform better strategic decisions around what the strongest arguments will be, or particular holes, and basically whether you want to settle or whether you want to bring the claim or fight the claim.
Yeah, and I love that you used the word strategic there, because I talk a lot about, you know, AI coming in, removing and automating, you know, a lot of laborious, you know, being able to really kind of, like say, 10 million documents, that's a heck of a lot of documents, but this frees up time to use that strategic thinking. And that's where I still think the human side is so important in the law. I think that's super powerful. I think lawyers can be even better advisors, counsel, consultants, experts to their clients. And I think it's an exciting time. I think firms just need to get on board with the fact that the puck is going in that direction. It's never going to come back. So, you know, rivers flow forwards, never backwards. And I think that approach needs to be had by all law firms. I think they'll find it very tricky in 2025 to be competitive. I want to talk about LinkedIn because, you know, I've been following your journey. I think it's great what you've been doing in terms of putting yourself out there and posting and sharing a good blend of content. But one of your LinkedIn posts highlights why posting on LinkedIn if you're in the legal industry. So, for example, what have been the benefits of sharing your journey online specifically, and what impact have you seen from being very open with the legal community? Because I, for one, encourage it.
I think it's quite unusual the way that I write in a way, because quite a lot of the standard form of lawyers writing on LinkedIn is to typically put out some kind of legal development, market development, whether it's introduction of legislation, something that's coming down the track. And I can totally see why people do that, which is they're trying to position themselves as expert and really highlight their expertise as a way of starting a conversation with a client who may go on to, this may impact them. But I think that there's a huge element of client relationships which is based on people, and people want to know people, and they want to be able to get along with the person they're working with. If I think about what I just said about the life cycle of a case lasting 2 or 3 years on average, that's quite a long time to be dealing almost daily with a litigator. So you'd hope that you would get along in that time. And so I think I saw an angle in which you can share perhaps a bit more about what the job looks like, or who am I? What do we bring to the table? What do people like me look like? And also, to some degree, talk to peers or aspiring lawyers about experiences that I think are universal, even if the example that I've provided is quite specific to me. And I think that's one of the things I've been really surprised by, is just how many people take the time to message me, sort of saying hello and sort of saying thank you. This really resonates. People don't talk about this stuff, but it's really important, and actually is the overriding experience that they've had of their time in private practice. And so kind of going from there, which I think is nice in and of itself, but if you want to treat LinkedIn as a sort of marketing business development platform, there is nothing, I think, that compares to LinkedIn in terms of impact and reach. So there are certainly clients and potential clients on there, whether that's currently that they are a client or a potential client, but also in future. So the very people who are currently my peers may well be going into in-house roles in the next 5 and be choosing who they want to instruct. I think it also has allowed me quite a lot of opportunities. So whether that's things like this podcast, to speaking at an event conference, or being invited by others to attend conferences, to being approached with mandates for work, and also job opportunities. So there's the sort of opportunity side of it. And the stuff that for me I think is really important is finding your people. It's been so affirming to meet so many people who are welcoming and friendly and collaborative. And it was a sort of unexpected boon to realise just how kind the world can be, really.
Yeah, everything you just said, plus one. It's what I've been trying to preach for many, many years, as, you know, probably somebody quite early to this. And, you know, I always say collaboration is domination, but ultimately you're building a personal brand, right? And people are craving human connection, and you're daring to put yourself out there. You're daring to share, and you're connecting with people. And like you say, you're building your tribe. And as a result of that, and this is why I've advised LinkedIn, helped them on product rollouts. I've got some LinkedIn learning courses coming out for people on personal branding, how to use the platform, been on the platform for a long time, because it is the world's largest professional networking site, no doubt, but it also is humanizing in itself and encouraging content creation, collaboration, sharing, storytelling. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. And like you say, you reference all of the wonderful benefits that come from it, but you start from a place of value. You know, you're sharing your story, you're sharing things that are going to help and inspire people, hence people are reaching out to you. And yeah, absolutely, great opportunities come about. And you mentioned obviously the podcast, very kind of you, and we're delighted to have you on, and that's why we wanted to have the discussion today. But I know you've spoken at events as well. Recently attended, I think, the hashtag legal LinkedIn influencer event at Brown Jacobson. So you spoke on a panel alongside a previous guest we've had, Jen Shipley, who's obviously doing fantastically well on the platform, and others in the profession. So you shared your general perspective on LinkedIn's increasing role in the legal industry specifically. Do you want to talk more to any of those points, or to maybe encourage lawyers that might still be sat on the fence when it comes to LinkedIn?
Sure. I mean, so Simon Marshall, who ran that particular conference, asked us to think about a couple of relatively high-level questions, and it was very informal Q&A in which the audience was asked to feel very free to chip in, or to kind of ask us to focus in on certain things if they found it interesting. So we sort of broadly were speaking about the benefits of being active on LinkedIn, and I think one of the big things is converting it into real life relationships, because I think that's where true value lies in business, but also in life and in career. And also ultimately saying to people, if you don't enjoy it, you don't have to do it. There are so many ways to network. It's another string to the bow that's out there of how you can build connection. And then we also discuss things like the challenges you might face on LinkedIn, as well as the solutions, whether that's things like, I think, getting quite sucked into the algorithm. People can feel quite slavish towards it. Whereas it really should just be enjoyable. So if you feel like you're starting to get drawn into that way of thinking about posting, it's taking that step back and going, is this still fun? And ultimately not beating yourself up about not being pitch perfect, because none of the stuff that goes on that platform is really life-changing. I think we need a bit of perspective when it comes to social media. It'll be water under the bridge in no time, and you can edit and delete if you really have to. So it's really trying to kind of make those pressures that you might feel, or your anxieties and concerns, just a little bit more in perspective.
I remember when I collaborated with Gary Vee, which a lot of people will know, he always says, just post what you care about. And I always say it's personal brand, not perfect brand, right?
Yeah.
No one's looking for the perfect brand. If there's a typo and you're a lawyer, it's not going to be the end of the world. You can, like you say, you can edit it, whatever it might be. I know some people will be kind of phrasing at that, but the reality is we need to move away from this kind of the world is perfect, everyone is perfect, and the world is craving human connection. So the more that you share your stories, maybe some of those lessons learned, adventures, some of the struggles, some of the highs, some of the lows, I think that's really important. And I almost go a step further to say I think you almost owe it to others to share. I think not sharing is, if I can kind of encourage people, I would say not sharing is being selfish. So I feel like if you've been in a place where you feel actually you've got some stories, which everyone has stories, then you're going to help and be able to kind of help the next generation, or maybe peers alongside you, or even people who are ahead of you who are trying to understand how people feel. I think it's super impactful. Love it, Emma, in terms of what you're doing and all these sort of things and tips you're sharing. And I guess that lends nicely to advice for aspiring solicitors. What advice would you give to those who are looking to particularly specialize in the world of disputes?
Mm-hmm. So I was having a think about this, and if there's only one top tip that I could give, and obviously I'm very biased because I think the courts are very exciting.
Yeah.
The courts are free and they're public, they're open to the public. I used to lead training contract interviews whilst I was still working at the firm, and I have yet to hear a candidate say that they popped themselves down to court, sat in the public gallery and listened to what happened. But anyone can do it, and it gives you a real sense of what disputes look like, the execution of a dispute day to day, and whether you have a sense of finding it exciting or not. So I feel that would be something that could really make someone stand out, and it's something that there isn't an application process or a barrier to entry. Anyone can go along and do that. So I really like that as an idea for someone who thinks they might be interested in that area, to just almost demonstrate their interest and that they've taken that next step and they've been curious or cautious and acted on it.
I love that, and it's a really practical tip. And yeah, equally, then they can go and share their experiences on LinkedIn and start building a brand from that. And it gives them content. But like you say, they also see the job in action, right? And I think that's really really good. And we love practical, tactical tips and advice. And I guess one question that might you weren't expecting, but I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to ask a lot more of our guests this year. What's one skill in your toolbox that you would never want to lose that makes you a great lawyer? You could only keep one skill. What would be the number one skill?
Ask questions. I think being curious is, I don't know, a very transferable skill ultimately, and not necessarily specific to law, but I think you have to have a learning mindset. We were talking about how there's a huge breadth to the work that I did, and there are big cases that were considered better business cases. You have to get your head around and get to grips with something that is, for someone else, going to affect their baby, their business, and that you need to quite quickly understand the complexity of it. And so I think coming with those questions and having an open mind and doing the deep dive is really invaluable, but also just the way I like working. So that's one of the skills, I think.
And again, I love how you share that. It thinks back to when I first started my recruitment journey, even before the world of setting up my own legal recruiting business. First ever training session was the ability to ask good open-ended questions and fact find and be a really good question asker. Because then the better the information you get, the better the advice and the better the way that you can influence whatever it might be. So I love that. So thank you for sort of re-highlighting that to our listeners. If our listeners, which I'm sure they will, want to know more about your career, your journey, or what you might be getting up to, where can they find out more? Feel free to shout out any social media handles, any websites. We'll also make sure we include them in this episode for you too.
So I only currently have LinkedIn, but who knows, maybe I will have my own website in due course. I haven't yet worked it out, but yeah, do check out the back catalogue of things that I've been posting about. I try not to be too repetitive, so it's worth kind of having a trawl and seeing what I might have shared in the past, and I might keep going with it and see what more I can keep on sharing. So yeah, watch this space.
Absolutely. Well, we encourage you to do that for sure. It just leads me to say thank you ever so much, Emma. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show, learning more about your journey and what your inspirations were and all the great stuff that you've been doing ever since. And we're wishing you lots of continued success with your future career and indeed pursuits. But from now, from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, sponsored by Clio, over and out.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you like the content here, why not check out our world-leading content and collaboration hub, the Legally Speaking Club, over on Discord. Go to our website, www.legallyspeakingpodcast.com, for the link to join our community there. Over and out.